This is Truth Radio, 88.5 WMNF.
Join us at Wavemakers Live with me, Shelley Reback, your host of Midpoint, on April 8th at the Commodore, with Robert Fiesler, historian and author of the multiple award-winning book, American Scare, Florida's Hidden Cold War on Black and Queer Lives. Robert is a very engaging speaker, and he'll be in conversation with me on Wednesday, April 8th at 7 p.m. at the Commodore. Tickets are $10 in advance, $15 at the door, and you can get your tickets on the event page at WMNF.org. I hope to see you there.
Thank you for tuning in to WMNF Radio 88.5 FM. This is a public affairs program called Community Speaks, and I'm your host, Patro Mobili. I'd like to hear from you. Of course, this is my opportunity to talk to you. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with me, because today we'll talk about pride and human rights. St. Pete Pride begins April 1st, but has expanded to include all elements of the oppressed. Trans Pride and Juneteenth Pride have been added, giving rise to a political movement for human rights. And the United Nations has adopted Ghana's resolution on slavery and reparations, which was opposed by the United States and Israel and Argentina, the dictatorship, while the European Union and Britain, all slaveholders, abstained, not taking a position at all, of course, since they were also slaveholders. The Netherlands were the only Europeans to vote for the resolution. Nevertheless, the African continent still suffers from extremist violence and laws built on the current colonial import, homophobia. Ghana is one of the worst cases of an African country weaponizing the law against the LGBTQ persons. Today, a majority of African states, 32 out of 54 nations, still criminalize consensual same-sex sexual activity, despite the clear contradiction with established African Union and international human rights standards. And there has been a trend indicating a stiffening of existing laws in some African nations. In Uganda, for instance, where consensual same-sex activity was already illegal, the situation has worsened with passage of the draconian Anti-Homosexuality Act in 2023. An ominous wave of similarly worded legislation is on the brink of ascent across the continent. And we'll be hearing about all of those things today. Only 9 out of 54 African countries offer some kind of legal protection. The 3 main reasons for this are the legacy of colonial laws, the role of religion, and political homophobia, labeling homosexuality as un-African, which is the furthest thing from the truth. In addition to the death penalty in parts of Somalia, Uganda, and Nigeria, countries like Gambia, Tanzania, and Zambia impose life imprisonment for same-sex acts. In countries where homosexuality is legal, there is often no protection against discrimination, leading to social exclusion and abuse. And I'll be sharing all of these. We've been watching these storylines, you know, and there have been watchdogs like Amnesty International who have been keeping an eye on that. And so we'll talk about the colonial legacy, religion, and politics, and the roots of homophobia on the continent of Africa. But we're seeing that the United States, through its churches and its missionaries, are responsible for pitting these Africans against one another's in their laws, weaponizing these laws on the continent. And as a result, there's a majority of these nation states that are engaging in this human rights violations. But we're seeing it, of course, the right wing, the fascist right wing in the United States, fueled by the white church, are also pushing this on us. As the fascists in Florida have come for all of us, people are pushing back, standing together in resistance. We'll talk about some of the laws that we're seeing here in Florida, but we saw the third protest against a POTUS who thinks he has the powers of a king and surrounded by puppets willing to do and say anything for nothing or say nothing to stop his reckless behavior at home and abroad. And so before we get back to the music today, you will hear the political song LOSER, Loser, produced by Iran in the face of a war carried out by POTUS in Israel, which seem to think they can kill civilians and leaders with impunity. And that's a danger on the globe. We'll talk about all of that, and you will hear that song recorded by Southern Fried Cali here on Community Speaks today. But I do want to hear from you as we get into the program. You can call me 813-239-9663, 813-239-9663, or you can write me, DJ at WMNF.org. This is the Public Affairs Program. Comes to you noon every day. Of course, next hour we'll get back to the music with Lanny Whalen with It's the Music Monday. You're going to be treated the second hour with a live performance. So stay tuned for that. I'll tell you more about that before we get out of here. But right now, you're tuned to Community Speaks, and I do want to hear from you. And on my reading list is apropos with the conversation today. The Delectable Negro, maybe I'll play a little bit of that, but it was about homoeroticism, cannibalism, and the cultures of consumption in the context of American literature and the U.S. slave culture. And so we've been utilizing this book utilizes many staples of African-American literature and culture, such as the slave narratives of Oluwahu Aquino and Harriet Jacobs and Frederick Douglass, as well as other less circulated materials like James L. Smith's slave narrative, runaway slave advertisements, and numerous articles from black newspapers published in the 19th century. This book was written by Woodard, Vincent Woodard. It was on my reading list, called The Delectable Negro, Human Consumption and Homoeroticism Within U.S. Slave Culture, as we have seen on the globe right now. This attempt to has a resolution sponsored by Ghana against slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, but out of that was all kinds of cultural anomalies that nobody has talked about. And so Vincent Woodard wrote this book, The Delectable Negro, that pieces these strings together, these historical strings together, human consumption, in other words, cannibalism and homoeroticism within the U.S. slave culture that continued after slavery with the lynching cultures. And so, we've seen and heard stories about what people did when they lynched African Americans inside the United States. And this really speaks to what's at the root of the culture of the homophobia that we're seeing displayed on the part of those in power and those colonizers who are right now attempting to divide Africans from one another by weaponizing their laws. We're seeing the same kind of weaponization take place here. Florida's controversial anti-diversity bill, which passed the Florida legislature, and that would prohibit local governments from funding, promoting, or taking official action related to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And the legislature also allows the governor to suspend local officials who violate the law and empowers residents to sue local governments they believe are not complying. In other words, we have another law for a governor to act like he's a king. And so, we want to talk about and pull all of these dots together, connect all of these dots together, because we see that this language, this anti-diversity language, is also used to weaponize the laws against the LGBTQ community, which is why we talk about St. Pete Pride going forward and adding all of the elements of the oppressed other peoples to the Pride ceremonies in the face of this political attempt at defunding and threatening local officials with removal from office. That Pride continues to plan forward. And starting April 1st, but all through the summer, there are events planned right here in St. Pete. And so I like to hear from you as well, who are planning Pride events, especially right there in St. Pete, to talk about the courageousness that you are displaying by continuing to make these plans. 813-239-9663 is the number to call, and I see you're already calling, so I want to invite more of you to continue to go to the telephones and let's talk about what we're seeing happening in the pushback and how all elements of the oppressed got into the streets again over the weekend to push back against what is happening, this idea that people act like they're kings in a democracy. 813-239-9663. I want to go into Spring Hill and talk to someone with a very apropos name, Justice. Thank you for calling to Community Speaks.
Hello.
Justice
Hello.
from Spring Hill. Hi, how can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you pretty good.
Okay. I just wanted to say I'm often approached by people when we get into serious discussions about our government, their government, that it's about politics, and you're all about politics. And it's like, no, it's about civil rights and human rights, and you need to hear that and not the political stuff. And I'd also like to say that we need term limits on everybody in any office in government, and that we should not have parties once you are in government. Once you're in an office, you should not be allowed to speak of one party or another. You are a party of the people, or you're not in office. Dig it?
So you got to limit their speech.
Yes, we must limit their speech to a term limit. The Supreme Court, the senators, these people are in there for life. We got a guy that looks like a zombie as a senator. We should not have that. They are not in touch with the people at all.
But, you know, with the idea of money in politics, and I do understand what you're saying, but, you know, there's another piece of it that we'd often overlook, and that these people, when they're not in office, if they have, because there are some term limits, they've only become lobbyists and continue to push, you know, the same agenda.
Yeah, there should be no money. There should be no money in politics, of course. But, of course, the Supreme Court took care of that, 10, 15 years ago with saying corporations are people. Right? Citizens United, whatever it was called, right?
Right.
But you're right. There should be no money in politics. And I'll lend one more thing to you before I go, and that is that it's my belief that the only way we can get on a path to solving all these issues that people have is to abolish all forms of currency now and see the way people count.
Abolish all forms of currency. And I think, you know,
it's unnecessary.
That may or may not be true, but I think one of the things we could just, you know, get back to basics and make this POTUS not violate the law. He is violating the law by pushing the cryptocurrency and the whole tech guard, the new oligarchy there. Mm-hmm.
I totally agree, but the POTUS is a fictitious office. They are just puppets. They always have been. They are ran by corporations, lobbyists, blah, blah, blah. Again, the money.
With a lot of power, though. Power of the gun.
Yeah, because of the money. Money is power. Who's going to have the nuclear weapons? The guy putting all the satellites in the air. Who's that? Elon Musk, richest guy in the world. You can't have that. Take away the money.
Yeah, and we saw the danger of him with that Starlink thing. He can decide when to use Starlink and not hurt Russia and not help Ukraine. So he was picking winners or losers in that war.
Right? Overall, it hurts everyone. Money hurts everyone.
You've heard of the company Anthropic as well, have you? We'll talk about that in future shows.
Sounds familiar. They
use AI to decide who's gonna decide which who gets to decide the nuclear button. AI can't decide those sorts of things, and they tried to limit it, but that's when the Pentagon fired them or got rid of the contract because they wanted to put that limit on them.
I do recall that. We don't need AI. We need food. We need clean water. We need to take care of our children and women. Is that going to happen with AI? I don't think so. We don't need AI. Look at all the energy it's going to take. We don't need it at all. Elon Musk needs it. We don't.
Right.
Great. But thank you very much. I got to get back to work.
All right. Thank you, Justice, for your call. Talking about apolitical people, and you're right. There's a lot that we have to fix And one of those things is the power of money, the power of the rich. And we call it the No Kings March, but there were already rallies, no oligarchy rallies, promoted by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, who had run for president. And, of course, too many voters decided to make this POTUS for a second time, despite all that we saw in the first term competitive. And here we are. And so we're trying to reverse what is actually an incompetent president in the White House and his sycophants around him in Congress that aren't doing anything to reel him in, at least on the Republican side, and everything. But the mathematics isn't on the side of the Democrats right now. So here we are. We're stuck with this because of a decision that too many voters decided to make. And right now we're also seeing the Supreme Court having to deal with the issue of birthright citizenship. Who thought that we'd ever have to deal with birthright citizenship in a country that decides that if you're born here, you're a citizen? It's just that simple. It's just that simple. But we're talking about the laws, the weaponizing of laws against us in a lot of ways. And but in one aspect, we're talking about how the LGBTQ community is seeing themselves being weaponized right along with it. We're seeing the assertion of a racist lobby that wants to get rid of diversity in a diverse country. None of this makes a whole lot of sense until you realize who's in power and who's trying to weaponize that power. And will taking money out of politics really be all that needs to be done? Well, the Supreme Court has answered that question. So a lot of eyes on the Supreme Court today as they're dealing with birthright citizenship. But how much will have to be weaponized before we wake up? And we're seeing governors act like kings. We have a legislature that is allowing a governor to threaten to remove elected officials from office right here in Florida. But despite that, there are people who are pushing back. That was on the issue of diversity, equity, inclusion, but also using those anti-DEI laws to go after the LGBTQ community. And in spite of that, those people who have been planning Pride celebrations are expanding those celebrations to include all elements of the oppressed. 813-239-9663. My name is Patrick Mobili. Sage stands ready to take your telephone calls so that we can get you on the air to join this discussion here on Community Speaks. And so we'll go back to the telephone lines, but you can also write me, DJ, at WMNF.org. One is written, since you were talking about slavery, have you ever heard of West African state Dahomey? Have you ever heard of Anthony Johnson and John Kasor? Well, I've heard of Dahomey, of course. Maybe you can call and tell us more about Anthony Johnson and John Kasor. But right now, we'll go to Lakeland and talk to JT. Thank you for calling to Community Speaks. You wanted to say what?
Hey, Mobili, this is Joe calling out of Lakeland, man. Long time listener and caller to your program.
Thank you.
And as well, I want to chime in, man, because the manipulation, and I'm going to say evil, that the Republican Party is now blatantly exposing themselves to be to America, and of course, their anchor states, Texas, Florida, are at the forefront. And I just recently saw on TV the sheriffs who are now, they're politicized. They have, the sheriffs who are supposed to be neutral and support the law.
Mm-hmm.
The law, there's no, the law is not black or white. They always say that. Law is, black, they say that in the court. The law is not Republican or Democrat or independent. The law is supposed to be for everyone. But yet these Republican sheriffs, Grady Judd and several, are now on TV supporting Byron Daniels, the new Trump black governor candidate they're trying to shove down our throats and appeal to, the people, the voters of Florida, and shove this puppet candidate down our throats to make you think that he's different, which he is not. This man will be probably worse to make himself. He'll probably go out of his way to be their boy. And I just can't even stomach that the sheriffs are supporting or out here on TV, using taxpayer money and dollars and whatever to endorse this man. And it's just so much wrong, y'all, that with the way things are going in the direction that they are trying to take, not only Florida, but America. They're trying to actually target and change the course of democracy towards a dominant Republican, do as I say, authoritarian
one-party
type of
state
government. A one-party state. And you got to wake up. Florida, you got to wake up. You got to do what Texas is trying to do with Talrico, and you got to. We just got to. It's either that or we just go all in and we're a communist nation. Y'all want to be like Russia? Y'all want your kids and people will be jailed and killed and jailed for lifetime for doing little things, little acts. China's the same way because that's where they're going, y'all. If you
communist
sit back on your laurels and not vote to democratically, this is where America's going. This is where Florida's going.
Communist authoritarian, because you make an interesting point when you talk about the sheriffs being politicized in that manner, because I saw that more starkly when the governor of Florida removed the Andrew Warren, the attorney general, elected attorney general, and the other one over in Orange County, and the sheriffs are standing there behind supporting that. This is a very anti-democratic move, and here are the sheriffs standing there and police chiefs supporting this move.
It's egregious. It's egregious, man. It is egregious, and this is why that should have never been allowed. It should have never. That bipartisan, the manipulation of certain offices, which they're trying to do now at county level and local level. The Republicans are targeting this. They're all behind that. They want to gerrymander. They want to change America, y'all. I mean, you've got to wake up. Either you're a communist or authoritarian, or you're an American. You're behind the democracy, because they're going to take us to that extreme. They're already doing it. Trump has now announced that underneath this ballroom, which everyone speculated, there's this grand bunker, which I'm sure he'll seclude to when the vote doesn't go his way, and they'll be sequestered underneath this bunker, saying it's a military bunker, but yet it'll be where he's going to hold up when the election doesn't go his way, and he won't want to relinquish power. This is where this is going.
Yeah,
it is just unheard of. And now look what we're going to get into. I told my son, "You're getting your passport. You're out of here. You will not go fight for this authoritarian overseas." My father was killed in Vietnam. My mother served in the Army. They're both buried at Fort Sill National Cemetery. Both served. And we're a Gold Star family. And I will not let my son go serve in a politicized war for profit and greed backed by the Saudis and Israel's initiatives that aren't American attacks. We weren't attacked here. What are we doing? I mean, every Republican should just be appalled by what's happening right now. You guys are supposed to be the ones who are, pro, not for war and not for, what's happening right now all over the place. It's just a full blanket assault on democracy across America. Every conservative should be appalled, and everyone who voted for this man should be appalled, and your Republican candidates, because they're lockstep, y'all. They're all lockstep with what's happening right now.
They need another name for the word conservative, because they really are out of character right now.
It's out of character. It's out of step. It's out of this nation's backbone and morality of what we're about. And it's just if you can't wake up right now and see what's happening, then you're on some serious medication or drugs, and you really need help.
When you talk about, they talk about more money in their pocket. They thought that's what they were voting for, and when this ballroom military bunker under the ballroom, and you think about the cost overruns that has to engage that we're going to see, then again, that's a contradiction.
The whole budget's been a contradiction. Everything he said in this campaign is, they just asked for $200 billion more. The ICE tactics. It's just what has happened to America. And we tried to tell you that this man was unstable, and this was not the way to go. But this MAGA movement, and now the crazy's out there. Are you happy? Are you happy? Are you happy where it's going? We're going to be in World War III. Your sons and daughters are going to go die for what? For Saudi to get their way, to take over their oil fields. And let me tell you guys something. Yeah, Trump can get on the news and say, "Oh, America is the biggest manufacturer of oil." We don't. It all goes through OPEC. We don't control our own oil dollars, y'all. It all goes through. Yes, we can refine. We can produce a lot of oil, but it's not refined here to where it comes back into our own ports for our own dollar manipulation for our own oil. It all goes through OPEC. So his words are again false. It's such a smoke and mirrors that I just don't know, man. They said in the last days, many will be deceived, and many are deceived. It's just, it's just,
yeah, he showed that.
He's out there. He's out there, and now you got the War Department. Oh my God! And he's got some pastor preaching craziness and hate, and this doctrine of prayer over the Pentagon with evil and undertones of world domination and killing and murder and behind prayer, all under the guise of Christianity. My God, what's going on?
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing that you see it. If you see it, other people see it. So trust that. And thank you for calling, because now other people hear it. They hear your frustration. Thank you for that.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you, bro. Be safe.
All right. You do the same. 813-239-9663. 813-239-9663. It was good to see that people are out there pushing back. One emailer has written, and you can email me, dj@wmnf.org. They attended the Gulf to Bay No Kings March, and this emailer met a man, thank you, Ann. That's Ann from Osmar, says she met a man who used to support this POTUS, but said he saw the truth of what's happening and changed his mind. And this gave Ann hope. But the truth was out there. The truth was out there before this, the 2024 election. But there was so much propaganda that Americans were sharing with one another. The first time around, the Russians might have been sharing propaganda on both sides just to divide us. Didn't really need anybody from the POTUS's camp, 45's camp, who's now 47 camp, to help him. He really didn't have any, Putin didn't really have any trust and hope in the intelligence of this president. But the second time around, we Americans were sharing enough lies and misinformation among ourselves. And that proved to be a problem, proved to be this election's undoing. And once, we're hoping that now that we see the incompetence at work, that, people will finally decide that this party has to be brought to heel, because even though he can't run for a third term, he's supporting candidates such as here in Florida that's going to act in very much the same way, and maybe hopes of getting enough of a cult personality around them to continue this kind of incompetence and craziness that we're seeing. Is a lot of contradictions playing itself out before your very eyes. Let's go back to the telephone lines and talk to Eduardo. Thank you for calling, Eduardo. You say what?
Yeah, sorry I couldn't make it to you calling yesterday's show, but I wanted to bring up, I saw this on the local news, the teen takeover, and this happened in Chicago too, because I'm from Chicago. happened over that. They took over streets in downtown. And I think there needs to be more parental responsibility. And I think once it gets dark, I don't think anybody under 18 should be outside. We want to get these people educated. Here's another reason why, if these people are not educated and they're not disciplined, how do you expect them to get to the voting polls? So this is something that, we need to take note of. And there was a lady that was killed in Ybor City in one of the garages. So,
yes,
let's if we see somebody, we can, hey, are you okay? Or accompany them to their car or something like that, but not have them, by themselves, So be gentlemanly and help them out if they need any help.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's my comment. But, yeah, let's get these young people, educated so that way they know what issues are in front of them as they grow older in life.
And register.
Get out there and vote.
Get them registered, because that's the way they're trying to limit and suppress the vote is suppressing registration.
Yeah.
So
then you're wondering, well, why was the voter turnout low? Well, there you go.
That's it. That's part of it. Yeah. Thank you, Eduardo.
All right. Thank you very much.
And local crime is always on our minds, but of course, that's always another thing that is being exploited by the right to force authoritarianism on us. And one emailer has reminded, don't forget the sheriff standing behind this governor, all lying through their teeth about crime rates being much higher than they really were and are. That's from Charles in Tampa, and that's another thing that is exploited in every campaign from the authoritarian right, and that is to make you all fearful about crime and then get in office and really they don't know what they're talking about. One emailer said he saw a sign during the rally that read, "No false king." But yeah, 813-239-9663, 813-239-9663. One emailer, Tom, said that one caller was a true Christian, and it sounds like this was a Christian that recognizes the contradiction of these politicians. 813-239-9663. And, it was all about talking about how they're coming for us and many groups in this country, especially in the state of Florida, the LGBTQ community, and how, they're going to be starting the Pride events in a moment of political, people are being politically ostracized right now in the state of Florida. And so it's taking courage, the people being defunded and threatened with their jobs for supporting DEI and LGBTQ pride events. And so we're seeing, people are still continuing to make those plans in a moment of this political authoritarianism. And so it takes courage. So this show today was about talking about that courage, but we're also seeing some, as callers are pointing out, it's egregious behavior, using warfare without an exit plan. And we've seen at least one governor, Wes Moore of Maryland, who has been doing a lot of pushback on these war plans or lack of a plan before going to war. And so it's important to recognize that there are those who have been in the theater of war, who were in the military, but it wasn't this POTUS. He was never in the military. Wes Moore was in the military, has been talking about what he sees as a problem. He's a rising star on the Democratic side. It's a decorated combat veteran, anti-poverty fighter, a charismatic public speaker, and he was elected governor in 2022. He's been compared a lot to Barack Obama. So we'll be watching to see if he will get any more respect in the face of what we're seeing as incompetence on the part of the POTUS that's in power right now, and a Congress that's not pushing back the midterm elections. We may see some change on that, but as some callers are pointing out, if you don't get these billionaires who have done a lot to bankroll a lot of the misinformation and the warfare and a lot of these authoritarian policies, throwing it down our throats and pushing these candidates in states and local elections. What we're seeing is even at the polls, people are beginning to push back. We're seeing that these candidates that are being supported by this POTUS are losing their elections. And so we're going to keep an eye on what you, the people, are going to do, because that is the one power that you have, and the one power, the voting, the power to vote is the one power they're trying to suppress at every level. And they're working fast and furiously. They can't plan a war with competence, but they can certainly do everything they can to suppress the voting. We're seeing them do exactly that. And so it's important to connect the dots and continue to push back on what we're saying is happening in this country and on this globe. And there's a lot of people who have been writing about and writing even new music about what is happening around us, and writing books about what is happening around us. And so all taken together, maybe culturally, we'll come to some consensus on how to push back on all of this. 813-239-9663. That's the number to call if you wanted to chime in on what is happening. If you went to any of the protest marches, and if you have something that you want to add to the conversation, of maybe some of the things you've heard and seen over the past few days. And if you want to talk about these laws that are oppressing people, showing a willingness to impose authoritarianism on groups inside of this country and inside of the state, while at the same time, a lot of what they promised, things like no endless wars and no cost overruns, are adding to the deficit, passing a budget that puts more money in your pockets. We're saying all of that was a lie, and none of that's going to happen. If anything is going to go into the plans like the ballroom, that it's unprecedented. And a lot of people have been saying that this military bunker that's going to now be under the ballroom, that's supposed to be bulletproof and impervious to drones, is it's just another bunker, probably for this president to hide under when things get tough, and maybe even try not to leave office. But we're not going to project on any of that right now. We're talking about what is happening in front of our very eyes, the wars, the rising costs, especially of oil and gas, and the need to build these data centers that's going to make even renewables more expensive, or at least the use of the fossil fuels to fund fuel the renewables is going to be made harder, as it's going to take a lot of energy to use these data centers, to build these data centers and use them for AI. But who's going to foot the bill? Who's going to get the vast majority of the costs? And that's you and me, the residents, who have to pay higher electricity costs in order for these billionaires to have their data centers. And but that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that these billionaires are controlling too much, and it's time for the pushback. 813-239-9663. But let's get to part of the reading list, as we're talking about how, in the face of the slavery resolution that came out of Ghana, we're also seeing that, those who were slave-holding nations voted against it or abstained from voting, but at the same time ignoring what is continuing to be a scourge on the African continent, and that is homophobia, and the fact that the missionaries and the churches are from the United States, and even Russian propaganda are coming to bear on these African countries that keeps pitting Africans against one another. And part of that, the vast majority of that, is against members of the LGBTQ community on the continent of Africa, continuing a human rights violations that is comparable to enslavement. And so, on the one hand, I support resolution against slavery and for reparations, but at the same time, I think that we have to recognize the human rights violations that are at work in the weaponization of these laws on the African continent that is also a colonial import. And this goes back quite a ways. And in this book, The Delectable Negro, part of my reading list for the first quarter of this year, this was an eye-opening book. It utilizes many staples of African-American literature, as I said before, to talk about this political framework of how, the dictated both European and white American arousal towards black males and the hunger for black male flesh. This was a interesting book to read. I'd like to play you the introduction of that book. That's at least part of the introduction of that book, because I thought it raises some interesting cultural points that helps explain a lot of what we're seeing playing out today culturally. Let's get to that. This book, The Delectable Negro, Human Consumption and Homoeroticism Within U.S. Slave Culture, written by Vincent Woodard, was an important book that requires a lot of discussion. Let's take a listen.
My study emphasizes homoeroticism over homosexuality. By definition, homoeroticism implies same-sex arousal and draws attention to those political, social, and libidinal forces that shape desire and, ultimately, the homosexual act. The homosexual components of the feasting, partaking of the boiling pot of Negro soup are less important to me than the racial assumptions, political aspirations, gender codes, philosophical frameworks, and cosmologies that dictated the feelings of arousal on the part of European and white Americans toward black males and hunger for black male flesh. For example, the larger discussion of Negro effeminacy, or the idea of the Negro as the lady of the races, shapes European male desire in the Belgian cartoon. It sets the stage for homosexual consumption and makes possible what Eve Sedgwick refers to as homosocial bonding. Sedgwick had written about Victorian-era homosocial desire as operating through triangulation, operating through its relation to women and the gender system as a whole. Her referent for gender is the female body. However, in the cartoons discussed earlier, the African man functions as the feminized figure. Through him, the general, the soldiers, the porters, and the field attendants bond and share in homoerotic desire. The final outcome of the Negro soup scene is a type of homosexual consumption. However, long before we get to the homosexual act, the machinery of homoeroticism clicks into play, shaping and dictating the meaning and significance of the homosexual act. David Halperin has cautioned against easy conflations of modern conceptions of sexual subjectivity with those that figured in the emotional lives of pre-modern subjects. His concerns reflect the general understanding within queer theory of homosexuality as a constructed historical phenomenon. Medical and psychological discourses at the turn of the 20th century normalized and pathologized the homosexual personality type. The word homosexual was in turn reclaimed by same-sex identified activists, intellectuals, and cultural workers in the 1950s and 1960s. However, the word homosexual had no currency in the 18th and 19th centuries. Neither, for that matter, did the word homoeroticism. Taking to heart the importance and necessity of historical specificity, I do not attempt to homoeroticize black experience in the 19th century. That is, I do not attempt to graft an arbitrary language and sexual modality onto the time period. The word homoeroticism in my study serves as a referent for a large set of same-sex desires and intimacies that include romantic friendship between men, same-sex incest in the context of plantation patriarchy, the romanticization of and exoticization of whiteness, and literal and metaphoric cannibalism, among other things. All of these terms I identify and extrapolate from their appropriate historical and cultural contexts. Often, though, when a blanket term is called for, I use the word homoeroticism to refer to any combination of these subcategories of experience. By coupling homoeroticism with cannibalism, I have sought to ground the meaning of the word cannibalism in the African-European encounter and in the Middle Passage, the originary site of Black erotic sexual encounter. Paul Gilroy's The Black Atlantic, Modernity and Double Consciousness resuscitates the Atlantic as a living, symbolic, and cultural entity for Black people of the African diaspora. Gilroy effectively recasts the Atlantic as a 20th century migratory structure through the image of ships, composed of triangular routes along which Black people in South Africa, England, and the Americas have ferried philosophical, political, and musical materials. Like Gilroy, I also appeal to the African diaspora as a site of Black cultural formation and transmission. However, for me, the organizing metaphor is not the ship, but the captured bodies brought aboard slave ships and the ways those bodies, specifically male bodies, underwent processes of sexual and social cannibalization. Traditionally, historical considerations of cannibalism in the context of European exploration and occupation of foreign lands focus on European ideas of natives, American and African, as cannibals. Take the 1503 decree of Queen Isabella of Spain that dictated that no Indians under her dominion were to be hurt or captured. However, a certain people called cannibals might be fairly fought and, if captured, enslaved as punishment for crimes committed against my subjects. This early distinction between Indians and cannibals would eventually give way to the thought that all Indians and Indian ways were heathen or subject to cannibalistic practices. Similarly, Europeans, generally speaking, believed diverse African groups from one end of the continent to the other a cannibalistic race. 19th century Europeans and Americans promulgated the idea of the heathen African, which implied cannibalism. Speaking of the Christian reformation of the African cannibal, Reverend Henry Ward Beecher defined heathenism in 1850 as derived from idolatry, from fornication and incest, from infanticide and cannibalism. Today, a growing body of cannibalism scholarship has developed that spans the disciplines of literature, anthropology, history, philosophy, political economy, cultural studies, and post-colonial studies. In fact, cannibalism is said by many scholars to be one of the most important topics in cultural criticism today. An exciting outcome of this emergent corpus of cannibalism scholarship is that it takes us beyond the Eurocentric master narrative of cannibalism into a complex arena that includes, for example, recent sophisticated work on African Maine and Azande customs and practices of cannibalism. We now have a deeper understanding of the human sacrifice and consumption rituals of Aztec and other Mesoamerican people. We also now have studies that excavate and analyze European legacies of religious, medicinal, and survival cannibalism, and still other studies that locate the cannibalistic urge within the European Enlightenment itself, within the workings of the modern and postmodern European and American state. The post-colonial branch of contemporary cannibalism studies has been most helpful to my work. This branch has, more than any other, undertaken to unearth and analyze the cannibalism discourses that arose from colonial contact between Europeans and Africans and Native Americans. As I emphasized earlier, Europeans were not the only ones who understood the colonial encounter in terms of cannibalism. On both sides of the Atlantic, in Africa and the Americas, Black and African people in the 19th century documented this culture in slave and travel narratives, political philosophy, and treatises, newspaper articles, and sermons, among other types of documentation. For example, the famous 1839 slave insurrection aboard the ship Amistad occurred because the Mende revolt leader, Sengbe Pie, and those who followed him feared that Spanish slavers intended to eat them. As I have demonstrated, the African belief that Europeans were cannibals was not uncommon. Importantly, such beliefs represented the captured Africans' first articulations of an intersection between themselves, their bodies, erotic life force, labor capacity, and exoticization, and the Europeans' hunger for new land, physical and psychic contact with foreign others, and a perfect state of global dominion. The logic and incisiveness of those first African critiques of European cannibalism have accrued power and congealed into a number of contemporary African cannibal discourses. For example, in contemporary Sierra Leone, the land of those original Mende aboard the Amistad, cannibalism serves as a politically charged hidden transcript intended to expose, discredit, and disrupt the imbricated relationships of power at work in Sierra Leone during the late 1980s, just prior to its descent into civil war. Today, in the context of post-colonial African political struggles, the language of inequality continues to revolve around the metaphors of eating and, by extension, cannibalistic consumption. The trope of cannibalism as a symbol for the economic exploitation, material accumulation, and violent coercion carried out by post-colonial elites has, in fact, come to dominate African political discourse. Because the examples of cannibalism that I use in the book range from figurative tropes to literal flesh-eating to rituals of flesh-taking and harvesting, I employ a cluster of terms that delineate the range of applications and cannibalism context that my study encompasses. The list includes the words consume, consumption, social consumption, appetite, taste, delectable, delectability, hunger, ingestion, and auto-cannibalism. I use the words cannibalism and consumption interchangeably. The phrase, a culture of consumption, might elsewhere appear as a cannibal culture. I frequently use consumption as a modifier, as in consumption rituals and consumption practices. I think that my preference for the word consumption has something to do with the word's rootedness in modern notions of market economies, commodities, consumer appetite, and so forth. While my usage is always particular and usually grounded in human-to-human exchanges, I always have in mind the affluent ruling class 18th and 19th century economies that make possible the consumption of the slave along with other traded commodities such as liquors, spices, and foodstuffs from foreign lands. I use the words taste, appetite, and delectable mostly to refer to how the desire for the African slave or American black person had Epicurean implications. This desire was less about literal consumption and more about the cultivated taste the white person developed for the African. Whites often satiated this taste and appetite through acts of violence, sexual exploitation, imagined ingestion of the black, or through staged rituals designed to incrementally harvest black spirit and soul. The delectability of the black person was, of course, a factor in literal flesh consumption. But my main point, which I explain at length in Chapter 1, is that literal cannibalism always occurred within cultural, ideological contexts.
That was from the book, that was an introduction to the book, The Delectable Negro. Very interesting book about human consumption and homoeroticism within U.S. slave culture as we look at the weaponization of laws on the continent of Africa. The vast majority of African states are passing anti-gay laws. So that's the show today. My name is Patrick Mobile, your host for Community Speaks. Keep it tuned. Next hour, we getting back to the music with It's the Music Monday with Blaney Whalen. As I said, we got to get a live performance from Victoria Cardona. She's in the second hour of It's the Music Monday, and that she's based out of South Florida. Victoria Cardona is a guitarist, a vocalist, and a multi-instrumentalist, one-woman band. So stay tuned for that today here on WMNF. That's my time here on Community Speaks, WMNF Tampa. Stay tuned for a news update from The Scoop.